I'm gonna come right out and say it. I didn't really like Silksong that much. I thought it was tedious, annoying, and parts of it just felt poorly designed. It wasn't even the difficulty that bothered me the most. It was the fact that you have virtually no time to catch your breath. Around every corner is a boss fight or arena, or in a lot of cases, both. And then if you die, you have to trek halfway through the zone just to get back to where you died. I thought the music was a step backward compared to the first game, and the enemies were more obnoxious than anything. I remember playing Hollow Knight and being able to just run around in an area and listen to the music and just get lost in the world of Hollow Nest. I didn't really feel that way in Silksong. I can't remember the number of times I turned the game off and said, no more. I play games to relax and de-stress, not to get frustrated. I don't want to spend the little free time I do have to quote-unquote get good. I want to play a game, face a little challenge, and then relax. This game was the literal opposite of that. So why would I keep playing the game? Simple. Hornet. In my opinion, I'd say she could arguably be a top 5 video game protagonist of all time. Now, I don't make this claim lightly, but I believe she is so compelling and deep as a character that I just had to talk about it because I don't believe I'm alone in this assessment. You may think this is a stretch, but hear me out. Whatever my gripe is with the gameplay of Silksong, it is undeniable that Team Cherry knows how to world build better than most other developers out there. The worlds of Hollow Nest and Farloom are incredibly detailed. There is so much lore and history that it feels like it could be a real place. This extends to the characters as well, and Hornet is incredibly well written. You really feel like Hornet is pulled into something much larger than herself. In fact, it's obvious that, just like the Knight, Hornet was one of the many who found themselves caught up in a mess. In some ways, her story mirrors Aloy's from Zero Dawn and Forbidden West. Both of these characters are alone in the world trying to find answers, but I think what separates Hornet from Aloy is that Hornet is driven by guardianship and her obligations as Princess of Hollow Nest. Aloy is a chosen figure who is created for a grand destiny. When we first meet Hornet in Hollow Knight, she is the compass that guides the Knight. She is affected by the story, but she is not the driver of the story, so we get to know her from a different perspective. Only when we get to Silksong do we really start to understand her more deeply and what events shaped her into who she really is. While playing the game, you're experiencing the world as an outsider, because Hornet is an outsider. She's not from Farloom. So as the player, you get to see the corruption as an outsider and not necessarily the primary victim. Yes, Hornet comes to Farloom as a prisoner, but she's not the only one that was brought, and she's not even close to being treated as poorly as others that suffer under the rule of the Citadel. At least not yet. Why is this important? Because so many games today focus entirely on a pretty generic formula. Bad things happen to the protagonist, and a journey of self-discovery takes place in order for the protagonist to find their truth. We experience the game and the world through the eyes of things that affect the protagonist, forgetting that whatever is going on has affected others longer and far more cruelly. I think this is another thing that separates Hornet from a character like Aloy. Aloy is set up to be special. She's an outcast, but it's clear that the story is setting her up to be a sort of savior figure. That's not really the case with Hornet. She's a guardian of a kingdom, but nothing more. But she relishes that role. She doesn't seek more, despite the fact that she could have. As the offspring of a pale being and a higher being, she's literally a demigod. She's lived for centuries and is even referred to as an old one. But instead, she's not this unstoppable force that has no limitations. She's very aware of her strengths and weaknesses. In fact, I'd go so far as to say in some ways Team Cherry went too far in the opposite direction by nerfing her, especially in the first act of Silksong. Someone with her lineage and tenure as a warrior shouldn't really have to learn skills like cling grip and double jump. As a weaver, silk shot and these other skills should have been baked into the cake. But I digress. As a protagonist, she's realistic and believable. Being of royal lineage, Hornet understands the number one thing that matters, her duty. Being a queen or a king isn't about having a title, it's also a burden and a responsibility, one in which Hornet embraces. This responsibility means that she must put her duty above her own personal wants and desires. As the guardian of Hollow Nest, Hornet takes her responsibility seriously, challenging anyone who may be a threat. She even challenges Quirrell at one point until he proved he was no threat to the realm. She challenges the Knight and eventually assists him when she learns he has the ability to stop the Radiance. When she comes to Farloom, Hornet knows she needs to figure out what is going on so she doesn't get captured again, but she also knows she can't just abandon the people she meets either. Along the way, she helps those in need as best as she can. Again, this is all due to her having a strong sense of purpose and responsibility. She has no real obligation to protect Farloom or help anybody else, but she does due to her own personal moral code. She's so self-confident that she knows she can find out what is happening and figure out how to deal with the problem. After experiencing the red memory, it's clear that Hornet has lived a painful and lonely life. Though it was stated she was a child of 3 queens, she was also burdened with expectations that even her mother didn't want her to have. Her mother, Hera, tells her to ignore what others say as their expectations are not hers. Yet her mother is unable to protect her from those expectations because she herself had obligations to fulfill. Hornet is tasked with 3 primary duties. The first duty was to protect the King's brand and defend Hollow Nest from those who would seek its destruction. The second was protection of herself. Vespa makes it very clear that Hornet has a duty to be prepared for when the Citadel comes looking for her, because if they are able to capture her, they would be able to use her silk to oppress others and rule with terror. The final duty was bearing the burdens of others so they would not have to. Unlike the first 2, this one was self-imposed. In the scene with the White Lady, she apologizes to Hornet for not only placing the burden of protecting Hollow Nest on her, but for her, the White Lady, and the Pale King's actions, which led to the death of countless vessels and Hornet growing up as an orphan. Despite not asking for that burden and not being responsible for it, Hornet frees the White Lady from her guilt by telling her she has nothing to apologize for. Duty is the trait that drives Hornet. She spends the following decades, maybe even centuries, defending Hollow Nest and the King's brand. Only when facing off and ultimately being defeated by the Knight does she relinquish some of her responsibility to him. She makes it clear to the Knight that his path is also one of duty, as she says, "Show me you can accept this kingdom's past and claim responsibility for its future." It's not enough for the Knight to just take on the Radiance. He must also learn to control the Void and become responsible for the protection of the kingdom. When the Knight kills Hera, Hornet is so duty-bound that she doesn't raise her needle to defend her mother. She knows that her mother must die in order for Hollow Nest to be saved. Ultimately, Hornet is the one who sees the bigger picture in things, and she is able to put aside her own feelings in order to ensure the safety of the kingdom. She's willing to go to extreme lengths to carry out her duty, from killing bugs that are deemed unworthy and may jeopardize the kingdom, to allowing the Knight to kill her own mother despite her own feelings of sadness in the act. At the time of this video, it hasn't been confirmed how much time has passed in between Hollow Knight and Silksong, but it's clear that Hornet has aged, not just physically but emotionally as well. She seems to have a less suspicious view of the world, and in her interactions with other characters in Farloom, she speaks to them with more grace and understanding. The Hornet we knew in the first game would have very little patience for someone like Sherma, but in Silksong, she speaks to him as a mother to a child. When she first meets him, she calls him Little One and teases him about singing to the door. In future interactions, she checks in on him and ensures he is safe, even going so far as to rescuing him in White Ward at one point. This Hornet seems to have a very different sense of nurturing and motherly instincts that she didn't have before. She also addresses other bugs respectfully, particularly bugs that are themselves warriors. That's not to say she's lost her hunter's instinct. Her ferocity remains. I could not have been the only person who got hyped when Hornet took back her gear in the slab. Her jumping into a room full of enemies, snapping the neck of one of them, and then kicking him in the face while backflipping off of him was probably one of the greatest things I've ever seen in a video game. She may have mellowed out as a person, but she's every bit as dangerous, if not more, than when she was a warrior in Hollow Knight. She is also still very much dignified and expects to be treated like a princess, as she quickly reminds several other characters with sharp but hilarious slaps. Which brings up another point. Hornet doesn't talk about being of royal lineage. She shows it. Everything about Hornet tells you what type of person she is based on how she carries herself. You understand she is someone of importance, someone with confidence. She stands straight, she speaks well, but never with disrespect towards those below her station. When conversing with Styx, she tells him that he doesn't need to call her mistress and that she doesn't want a slave. But later on, after bringing him the queen's egg, she basically gives in to him by telling him, "Yeah, as long as you don't displease me, I won't punish you." It seems she has developed the ability to decipher when it's time to correct someone or when it's not worth it. It's as if she learned that if Styx calling her mistress makes him happy, she's not going to rain on his parade. This seems small, but it goes to show how deep her character growth is. She doesn't just grow up because she's older, she matures because she has learned to reflect on her own experiences and not be so walled off. Several Hunter's journal entries show she has started to develop a soft side as well, especially when it comes to fuzzy or winged creatures. She assists in the rebuilding of several settlements and even goes out of her way to deliver them supplies. In order to end the threat of Grandmother Silk once and for all, Hornet knows she must dive into the void to end things, but it's clear based on the cutscene with the Everbloom being destroyed during the descent, Hornet must have realized it was a one-way trip, yet that doesn't stop her. As she goes through her journey in Farloom, Hornet's ultimate test of character growth comes from her interactions with Lace. I think in some ways, Hornet sees a lot of herself in Lace. While Hornet was able to eventually find herself, Lace doesn't have anyone or anything. Hornet was able to cling to her duty to move herself forward, but Lace only has anger and bitterness. Every time the two of them cross paths, Lace mocks Hornet. She laughs at her and goads her into attacking. In Hornet, Lace saw a foe with a strong identity and purpose, and it enraged her because it reminded her she herself has no purpose or sense of identity. Lace hates herself, and she especially hates her mother. When she sees Hornet, she sees someone who is everything she does not. This leads to her constantly projecting her own insecurity onto Hornet. Hornet, being much older and wiser, realizes what is happening and doesn't take the bait. Instead, she tries to get Lace to see that she is valuable and her life does have meaning. As someone who grew up as an orphan and forced into a role she did not want, Hornet felt Lace's pain, and like she did with the White Lady, Hornet wants to relieve Lace of her burden of self-hatred. But Lace doesn't believe it. When she is defeated in the cradle, she despairs, thinking that Hornet is now going to take the one thing she did have, which was a place by her mother's side. Even though she hated her mother, it was still a place she belonged, and now that was gone. Before diving into the void, Hornet tells Lace that she will release her mother's grip. She is referring not just to the grip on the land, but also on Lace. She tells Lace that Lace may succumb to the void, but as a daughter of Hollownest, she has survived and will endure, and that she has no fear. And with that, she dives into the void for their final showdown. After an intense battle, Lace is defeated. Hornet gently scoops up Lace and signals to Grandmother Silk that she's taking Lace with her. I'd like to think that Hornet was assuring Grandmother Silk that Lace will be safe, and upon this realization, Grandmother Silk knows she can finally let go. When they are finally safe and Lace wakes up, she looks at Hornet, not with anger, but with gratitude. She characteristically laughs, but this time it isn't laughter done in jest. To me, it's thankful laughter. The kind of laughter you share with a friend when you've gone through something traumatic together. The kind of laughter that you make when no words can really describe how you're feeling. The game ends with the camera panning to Hornet's face. She doesn't say anything, but I'd like to think she finally understood what it means to truly have someone to care about. Seeing the night again and knowing that Lace is safe showed her that she found what she's always wanted, a family to belong to and one to fight for. I've heard it said that Silksong is a game about motherhood, and I think that's true. But it isn't necessarily about motherhood in the traditional sense. Hornet, as far as we know, doesn't have any children of her own, but motherhood doesn't necessarily mean biological children. Hornet was cared for by others, and in turn, learned to care about others. Like a mother, she protected the pilgrims fiercely, not out of any hope for a reward for herself, but to bring them hope. I hope we get to find out more lore about what happens to Hornet after the events of Silksong, whether it's in a DLC or just information put out by Team Cherry. I'd love to find out how her relationship with Lace develops. Maybe she'll teach Lace she doesn't have to be angry and bitter to find peace. It'd be interesting to see if Hollow Knight 3 revolves around Lace, with Hornet serving as a guiding character again. But let me know what you think. Is Hornet one of the best characters ever?